Hello and welcome to the Investor Podcast series. Today we are going to explore deep tech revolution through the insights of a seasoned venture capitalist. I'm Devi, your host today, and I'm here to bring you a very inspiring episode. Joining us is Mr. Manish Singhal. He is a seasoned technologist and entrepreneur and venture capitalist with over 28 years of experience in building cutting-edge deep tech products and investing in innovative startups. He's the founding partner of Pi Ventures and focuses on accelerating AI and deep tech innovation in India. Welcome and hi Manish. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me over here.
So you have got a very inspiring journey. Can you please walk us through your journey and what led you to start Pi Ventures?
Sure. I graduated as a young engineer back in '92, and one of my dreams was to build something that I can hold in my hand. That was my definition of a product. And if you think about early '90s, the software revolution was just happening, right? So the most sought after job in our campus was actually TCS. And I did sit in that interview but couldn't go through, which was a blessing in disguise, I think. So eventually ended up doing a lot of hardware products, which led me to create a GPS, Indian GPS for Indian Army. And then went on, then I joined Motorola, I did a bunch of things over there, and then came back to India. And then that's where my startup journey actually started back in 2001, I think. And we were designing IPs for the rest of the world. In that whole process, this was very early days of IP companies in India, right? We're talking about early 2000. So hiring was a challenge, everything was a challenge. But learned through those ropes, ended up then doing probably the most famous product of my career called Slingbox. Which lets you watch your TV anywhere in the world. So I was the head of R&D in India, and that company became quite successful. We exited that company successfully, and that's where the first seed of what I'm doing today actually started. And my first thought was, okay, we did Sling, and we did so well. Very innovative idea, very disruptive execution. Can I be a multiplier force or a force multiplier for 10 such ideas at the same time, right? That was the seed of all this. And at that time, I had no clue. Venture capital industry was very much in the beginning, like totally in infancy. So in fact, I called my friend and I said, this seems like something I can do, right, after this. And he said, you build products, you build technology, you have nothing, you don't know anything about finance, so, better stick to what you know. And that was the end of it, actually. Eventually ended up leaving Sling post the acquisition. Then for a few years, I was just sort of in the ecosystem, mentoring companies, helping startups, putting some capital behind as an angel. And then while I was doing that, I faced one huge problem, that most of the product companies in India, they have some interesting ideas, but they're just unable to raise their first check. Very difficult. Why? Because I'm talking about 2011-12 there, right? Hardly any angel networks. There are, I think, a couple of them. Very few people willing to lead your deals. And a bunch of us got together and we said this needs to change. And the best way to change that is to mobilize more money towards it. And maybe the best way to do that is to create a platform where startups and investors can come together. And that was the birth of Let's Venture. And in the first few months, we did very well. We got lots of investors on board. We got some 10, 15 startups funded within like 6 to 9 months. So it was a great start. But slowly I realized that, this is, my role there is more of a broker, if you will, right? So I'm trying to get people to meet each other and then see whether funding happens. And then there were a lot of companies in which I was very keen, man, this looks good. But, there is no money available for them because my view matters only so much. So then the real seriousness behind this sort of started to emerge, that if I have my own capital in some form, then with my own conviction, I can back them. And how do we do that at some decent level of scale rather than putting my own capital as an angel? So one thing led to the other, and finally, I started Pi in 2016 with the vision of backing product companies. I have to tell you that initial vision was not about deep tech. Initial vision was actually product companies, and specifically in those days, through our research, we sort of saw that AI is coming, right? It was not there yet. So our first fund, which was launched in 2016-17, was actually totally AI focused. We were not a deep tech fund. We were AI fund. And, there were hardly any AI companies to fund in the beginning. So we had we made our way. But slowly, as we started making those investments, we realized that we tend to do better when there is a disruptive angle to the AI they are building, and not versus, let's say, an incremental version. And that gave us more clarity in terms of what is our sweet spot. So our sweet spot was coming, you have to be products, you have to be solving a global problem, and you got to be disruptive, right? So this led to our investments in companies like Niramai, SigTuple in early days, etc. And as time went by, one of the most interesting meetings I still remember I had was with a gentleman called Srinath. He's the founder of Agnikul. So he walked into our room and he said, "I'm building 3D printed rocket engines." I said, "What?" And we said, "We are an AI fund. We don't do this." I said, "Okay." And he walked out. But that sort of conversation stuck with me. I said, "No, there is something happening here which we cannot ignore just because we have an AI thesis, right?" So we went and met him again. We understood, and we were convinced that we got to back this, irrespective of what our thesis is. And that's how Agnikul happened. But it was a sort of a pivotal moment for us because we realized that beyond the digital world of AI, there is a lot of innovation happening in the physical world, right? Like Agnikul. I said, this cannot be ignored. In fact, I talked about material science innovation back in 2019 when almost nobody was looking at companies of this nature. And then we worked on it. And that's how slowly, to answer your question in brief now, our journey led to be a deep tech fund. So our vision became clear over a period of time. And now we say that we back global ideas that have global potential, but you got to have that disruptive 10x edge. And it doesn't matter which technology, which sector you're working on.
Thank you so much. That was quite a fascinating journey. I think in all, what we capture is you also brought about how you were a pioneer in not just deep tech innovation, but also in bringing investors together and starting that angel network. And also teaches us how to be very agile in kind of moving through what's coming and what's latest.
Sure.
Well, you did allude to a few points while you're explaining, but we'd like to know more about what you define as deep tech startups and how they are different from any other technology startups.
I think that continues to be a point of confusion for most, sometimes for us as well. I think best way to understand what deep tech is to contrast it what incremental tech is. I think deep tech or tech versus no tech is easy to sort of contrast, right? So put it simply, we say that there has to be a fundamental innovation. What does that mean? It means that if you put a few smart bunch of people together, they cannot come up with the same solution as you have come up with in a given set of time, right? So you have actually got some insight, you've cracked something which is your own fundamental IP, and go from there. I'll give you one example of, and this is a function of time, by the way. So what is deep tech today may not be deep tech tomorrow, and and so on and so forth, right? So back in the days, we funded a company called Visa, which is ultimately a chatbot, but targeted towards mental health. In 2018-19, okay, chatbots were sort of easy to make, not very difficult, but training that chatbot for mental health conversations was super tough. It was very, very difficult. And how do you come up with responses through generative AI was not even known, right? So it was a true deep tech company. But today, if you look at them, they still continue to hold their technical edge in spite of whatever has happened in the technology. But today, the same thing is not as deep tech as it was 4 or 5 years back, right? So things keep moving along that direction. It's a function of the technology curve moving. And therefore, we define deep tech as something where you can build a technology stack which is your own. It can be in the physical world, it can be in the digital world. And the test of time, it has to stay, it has to come through the test of time. What I mean is that, let us say that technology, so even for the Visa example, LLMs came and so many things came, but they're still holding their ground strongly. Because their fundamental stack had such good technical moat that still stands, right? And it was not disrupted by what happened tomorrow or what happened subsequently then. So that's the broad definition. Now mapping it in different companies it's not a 0-1 decision. It is a little bit of a, I would say, a thought out decision or sometimes the instinct, and sometimes we go wrong, sometimes we are right. But applying the same set of thoughts on a company is not very easy.
Well, that's comprehensive. I think what we are getting here is a leap kind of innovation rather than incremental would kind of define.
Yeah.
Well, having said that, can you also throw some light onto how the deep tech startup landscape within India is? What opportunities and challenges you see out here?
Landscape is pretty rich. I think now it is actually evolving every year. Now we see a lot more companies that we were seeing, let's say, 2 years back, right? And I'm pretty sure that number is going to increase. Broadly, to understand the entire landscape, we have divided it into 3 main pillars, if you will. One pillar of our thesis is around AI. AI, the technology is changing exponentially. A lot of things which even 6 months back we were thinking they're deep tech qualified or they would qualify the deep tech filter are no longer qualifying the deep tech filter, right? So it's changing very fast. But there are still interesting opportunities within the AI space which are deep tech, and those are the things that we are looking at. But even if I take out the deep tech filter, there is a lot of work happening in Gen AI in all areas. So that's one large landscape that India is innovating towards. The other is within the digital world, but let's say non-AI. So it could be security innovations, it could be blockchain-based innovations, etc. So there are a lot of other technologies which is not AI, but has opportunities to build deep tech companies in. And we've actually bagged a couple of companies in that space, and we're looking for more, and that's another area where things are happening. The third area, which is probably the broadest area, is material science-driven innovation. Material science is very fundamental to societies. In fact, if you think about it, there have been eras which are named after materials, right? The Bronze Age, the Stone Age, etc. Because every time a new material comes up, suddenly unlocks certain things which you couldn't do before, right? We call this broadly Silicon Age, right? Because all the semiconductors change the way we do things. So material science has always been a very fundamental essence of how technology is built over the period of time and what solutions it has brought into the market. And that is a huge space. So we've actually published a whole lot of our thesis on our website as well for more details. But essentially, material science has applications across. We are seeing fundamental innovation done in batteries, how the new batteries can be smarter, faster, more efficient, etc. You are seeing a lot more recycling technologies which can do things which we couldn't do before. Alternative materials. I would love to see a material which really substitutes plastic in all walks of life, right? We've done that in pieces. So there is a lot of stuff happening there. And there is a lot of things happening in the healthcare side through synthetic biology or other forms of creating new materials out there which is helpful. So, so that may be one way of understanding the landscape of innovation in India, whether deep tech or not.
Well, thanks. That was quite intriguing because would you like to throw some contrast between what's happening outside India versus drawing parallels to what's happening within India in that space?
See, similar things are happening outside India. In fact, we look at this from a slightly different lens. Each one of our companies and investments are such that they have to be winning at a global level and not just India level, right? So if you have really innovated and understood the business problem, you should be number one, number two in the world, right? Why say number one in India? And we have examples of those. Visa is the number one mental health platform in the world driven by AI. Agnikul is the only company having successfully launched a 3D printed rocket engine up in the sky, right? So, and there are more in our portfolio. And that's the really true hallmark of Indian innovation, right? It doesn't have to compare itself with what is happening out there, but it has to stand out if you are truly innovative, that okay, we are the number one company in the world, no matter what you're doing. But to answer your question, similar things are happening. It is at different scale sometimes because Indian fabric is still sort of unveiling itself. So we have whatever 2,000 deep tech startups. US may have 6,000 deep tech startups. So that scale may be different, but the things that they are innovating are very similar.
So sure. You touched upon some of your companies from Pi's portfolio. Can you share a few success stories or notable startups?
Quite a few of them. We talked about Visa, which is, now affecting or helping almost millions of people across the world in dealing with their mental health issues. We've talked about Agnikul, which is the only company in the world which has done 3D printed rocket engines to launch small rockets. Very unique company. We have another company called Pixis, which is actually quite scaled now. They are helping brands reduce their marketing and customer acquisition cost through generative AI, again globally. Some very interesting other companies that are there. One is Niramai. Niramai does breast cancer screening. We have Sigtuple, which does automated blood screening. We have in our younger portfolio, we have Silence Lab, which actually is providing authentication solutions to their customers across the world. We have Immunoto, which is doing drug discovery by a very novel method. We have Zero Cow Factory, which does milk proteins without starting from milk. So we have a bunch of companies which are very interesting, and they, in their own right, are innovating in a way that they can be in the top 2-3 companies in the world once they have reached a certain stage.
No, that's brilliant. You've invested in some of these amazing startups quite early on. So trying to understand what should be the needed symbiosis between an investor and a startup. What do you look in them, and how do you think the founder should express himself? Because oftentimes you're vouching for something often novice, I would say.
I think it's a bit of an art than science, but some frameworks do help us. Pre-investment, I think your question is more pre-investment, I think, right now. So let me try and address that first. So broadly, we are trying to answer just 3 questions in our head, right? First question is, are you solving a large and global problem? And I think there are a lot of associated questions. One of the questions is there a problem to be solved? So you could be solving an imaginary problem as well, right? So is there a real problem to be solved, right? So is this big enough? Is this globally applicable? So that's the key question to begin with. Second key question is, do you have an insight towards solving it in a way which could be 10x better to the outcome through a fundamental innovation, which is where the deep tech thesis comes in. And then that also has an associated whole list of breakdown things that you look at. And third is, are you a team which can pull this off, right? Ultimately, that matters the most. And the earlier you are in your journey, the team always matters, but the weightage on the team just goes dramatically higher because everything else can change. The market you're addressing can change. Possibly you can pivot on technology, although those are fewer examples. But the team is the team which will remain constant through this journey. So, and things change around you. So if things change around you, how do you adapt to those changes and still be relevant in the market and continue on your journey? So that comes fundamentally from the team. So these are the three broad things that we look at while making an investment decision.
Sure. And what about after investment? How do you see the journey with the investor for a founder?
Quite involved. We are quite involved without getting into their way, I hope. And our founders can tell you better with that. We look at it almost like an extension of a co-founding team, if you will, right? So we are bouncing board. We are out there with them to sort of help them whatever they need help in. Some interesting observations and learning over last few years on that front is we are all operators. We've built companies in the past, so I think, and we are all technologists as well, right? So we thought that we can help them in technology, but that is one area we have not helped any of our companies. And the reason for that is all our founders are 10x better than us in their own field of expertise, right? So of course, we cannot add value there. However, there are other things that we do add value in, and this changes depending upon the team we are working in. So it's sort of a fill-in-the-blank strategy. So let's say the founders are very strong in technology and product, but are struggling to get, let's say, good team together, so that we can help them in, how to fix your hiring flow, what to do, what not to do. Sometimes we've sat in the hiring interviews as well. One of the consistent things that I think across the teams we have helped is on the strategy side. So technology is one thing, product is another. How do you take a technology, create a product to address the market? And that's where a lot of dynamism also comes in, because things keep changing across or around you. So that's one area we have helped. We have helped in a lot of other important but not so glorified areas, right? Sometimes it's about designing an ESOP policy for a company, but a lot of founders go wrong in that. And we've done that. So a lot of operating help, which is not so much highlighted, but these are the essential gears and grease to kind of run smoothly, is where we sort of sometimes pitch in.
Well, extending to that, I think you alluded to certain problems that these founders have in general, but any challenges that you particularly see associated with deep tech founders?
Generalizing would be hard. However, I think I can probably say what would help the deep tech founders to progress better. And some of them may already be doing it, but having a structure sometimes helps. I think one of the areas where we can do better as a community is on the business narrative along with the technology narrative, right? So, any deep tech company which starts, their ultimate goal is actually what? It is not to be a deep tech company, it's to become a business. So when you start innovating, you're not innovating in a bubble, you have a business problem in mind that you're solving. So your business narrative is starting almost at the same time as your technology narrative. sometimes the founders can get too focused on the technology narrative. Oh, we have cracked this and this is best in the world, etc., which is great. But the business narrative also needs to develop. And when that balance is right, then it's a very good resonating story that you will hear, and they will also move forward. So how to get that balance right so that the technology narrative resonates with the business narrative at all points of your journey is something that we can do better as an ecosystem.
Wow, that's commercializing aspect of the technology.
Yeah. Yes.
Amazing. Now moving on to the final segment, so what motivates you to be in this frontier technology space?
I think I'm a super restless guy. So if you give me the same thing every day, I'll just lose my energy and not be good. And that was a challenge when I was working for bigger companies, and the things moved at the pace that they did. So what motivates right now is meeting founders, right? So every day, every week, we come across 10 new ideas, right? And okay, some ideas are not great, but let's say 3-4 ideas in that are great, or something that you have not got exposed to before. It's a massive opportunity for you to learn, right? And that constant learning keeps you going. So I think what motivates me is the new innovation I see every day in my job, and I'm lucky to have that job, and learn from the founders that we interact with, learn about new technologies, new product, new market, and therefore it never gets repetitive in some way.
Well, that's motivating for us too, to see how curious you're all the time. What are your insights on how the future for deep tech will be? Any technologies in particular, themes or ideas that you think will take off?
We've been saying this for a long time, and people have laughed at us for this as well. But I do believe that India will be a deep tech nation. And it could take 5 years, it could take 10 years. What I mean by that is today, when you talk about deep tech, 2-3 countries come to your mind. US, Israel, maybe China, right? India doesn't come in that narrative. When you talk about software industry, India comes in that narrative, right? So that's the difference between the two narratives right now. But I think give it a few years, when we talk about deep tech, India will come in that narrative. So that's the opportunity in front of us. That's the potential we have. I think it will be our loss if we miss it. I think probability is that we will hit it, and we will hit it sooner than what I think it can be hit in. Just like there is potential and opportunity to get there, there is one big risk that all of us need to be aware of as involved in the ecosystem, is to constantly compare us with these other ecosystems who've had a head start on us. India is a very unique place. Things happen differently here. India will find its own way to get there. And if we try and compare ecosystems, we should learn and bring some good practices, no problem. But if we constantly try and compare ourselves with what the West has done on this, I think we will either take longer or not get there, because the solutions for India are different. But we're very bullish on it. In terms of areas, I think the deep tech areas will keep changing because technology is a function of time. But one thing is very certain. We will see a lot more innovations in the physical world driven by material science than in the digital world. And in fact, today when we meet companies, I think most of the companies that we meet are in the physical world. We are already seeing that shift.
Yeah.
There are a lot more opportunities for deep tech innovation in the physical world. Digital world is also there, but I think the number of companies that we will see in the physical world will outshine probably in the digital world very soon. And for that, we need infrastructure. And it is coming up, like T-Works is a great example where you could come and prototype whatever you want. And we are seeing that In biotech quite a bit, there are lots of parks that have come up in Bangalore. Hyderabad is also planning a big genome city, I think. Right? So all this infrastructure is required because for the physical innovation of this kind, you need infrastructure which is expensive. And startups cannot afford to get them in-house in the beginning. So they will either need to collaborate with an incubator, or universities have a lot of these interesting infrastructure. So we do see a lot of collaboration going on with startups and universities because that infrastructure comes in handy. So it's happening. But that's where I feel that we should see a lot more companies becoming global companies from India in the coming decade or so.
Well, thank you so much. Before we close the episode, any final thoughts to our listeners and startup founders?
Well, we covered quite a few points. I would just say keep innovating and keep building.
Well, thank you so much, Manish. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. It's a very insightful conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. To all our listeners, stay curious, stay innovative. Thank you.